On the 1st of February 1685, instead of walking his dogs as usual in St. James's Park, a wealthy man went for a carriage ride and then returned home. That night, he went to bed as usual, but slept uneasily. The man gave the dreadfulest shriek and developed convulsions. His physicians rushed to his aid. They conclude the best course of action is to bleed their patient and take about a pint of his blood, and it trickles plentifully into a bowl. They then cupped him, scarified him, and blistered him. After this, they gave him emetics, cathartics, and enemas, all in a desperate bid to cure their patient and purge him of whatever evil was inside of him. They then bled him again, this time just under half a pint, and this was all before noon. In the afternoon, they gave him what's called a sacred tincture, in other words, a herbal remedy full of different ingredients. The next day, Tuesday the 3rd of February, the man had yet another convulsion. The treatments were not working. The pills and potions of learned men was rarely questioned. If a patient wasn't getting better, it wasn't the treatment that was blamed, rather the patient's body simply refused to respond. So his physicians did what any other physician at the time would do. They continued and ordered another sacred tincture to be consumed, this time one every 6 hours a day. They bled him of another half a pint of blood and blistered him. They followed this with more herbal medicines. Wednesday was a quieter day. No medicine was prescribed until the evening, and this was but another concoction of herbs and spices. At this time, they followed it up with spirit of human skull. This means taking a real human skull, grounding it down to a fine powder, mixing it with a medicinal liquid of sorts, and having the patient drink it. It was actually more common than you may think. It was believed the life essence of the deceased was still contained within the bones, and having the patient consume this would cure them. On the Thursday, bad news came. A dreadful fever had hit the town. The physicians took preventative measures to ensure he did not catch the fever and have it worsen his already deteriorating condition, including more of those sacred tinctures and more human skull. The next day, Friday the 6th of February, would be his last. The man felt so guilty that the doctors were working so hard to help him and his body simply wasn't responding that he actually apologized to them for causing an unconscionable time dying and confessed that I have suffered very much and more than any of you can imagine. He asked to see the light of the rising sun once more, after which he became acutely breathless and was bled of another half a pint of blood. After this, his speech failed, he became unconscious, and he died just before noon. This was the very true story of the death of King Charles II of England, and it's far from unique within the history of medicine. Welcome back to Doses of History. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Doses of History, Episode 3, Blood, Sweat and Tears. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the history of bloodletting. I'm James.
I'm Karen.
And I'm Honey.
And we're going to be talking about why bloodletting was so common for so long. Now, do we have any initial thoughts on the subject before we get into it?
For me, I think it was not an inviting topic because it's so controversial that it lasted for so long and nobody really gave it a very good thought that, hey, this is not working.
Yeah, it's not good, is it?
Yes.
Could you, I mean, you're not even, like today, if you think about it, you're not even allowed to use an out-of-date first aid box. And yet
Oh, stop. We didn't. Let's not bring
they're,
this up.
and they're using like a 2,000-year-old theory to justify bleeding someone of like pints of blood sometimes. I mean, it does make you think, doesn't it?
Prior to this, to be honest, all I really knew about it was the barber signs, and that was a fun fact for if people didn't know. We'll get onto that later. But when we actually started researching things like the amount of blood that was let and how common it was genuinely surprising to me. So I think it will be an interesting episode. It's a bit gory. The exhibition will be gory, but that's what we do at Bath Medical Museum.
Yes, and how about the leeches? I'm
Ooh.
still not processing that topic. It's very difficult for me to take it in.
Oh, we'll get into that later on.
hmm
We got things planned. All right then. Let's just do it. Let's just go for it. Guys,
Let's get into it.
bloodletting, blood, sweat, and tears. Let's go.
Bloodletting. Imagine this. You wake up, you're in medieval England. You have a fever, it's burning through your body. Your skin is hot, your head pounds, and every muscle aches. You're weak, disoriented, and afraid. So you do what any sensible person at the time would do. You go to the barber. Not a doctor, not a hospital, the barber. He wraps a tight cloth around your arm, sharpens a blade, and without hesitation cuts into your vein. Blood begins to pour into a bowl. This, in that moment, is called medicine.
Wow. It's almost impossible to process this through today's eyes. The idea that the same person trimming your beard could also pull your teeth, drain your blood, or perform minor surgery feels absurd, even disturbing. And yet, in cities like Bath, already famous for the 18th century with its healing waters, this overlap of medicine and everyday life was completely normal. Patients might spend the morning drinking spa waters in the pump room, right in the same place where Bath Medical Museum is today, and later undergo treatments like bloodletting if symptoms persisted. In fact, barber surgeons weren't informal practitioners. After the Act of 1540 under Henry VIII, they were formally organized into the Company of Barber Surgeons in London, responsible for procedures like bloodletting, wound care, and amputations. The discomfort we feel now comes from knowing what they didn't, that what was meant to heal could just as easily harm.
With recorded evidence of bloodletting stretching as far back as ancient Egypt, and historians believing it was practiced even earlier than this, it was the most widely accepted medical treatments in the world. It was prescribed for an overwhelming amount of conditions, especially in England, from fevers and headaches to mental illness and even the plague. For example, when yet another wave of the pestilence engulfed London in 1665, Nathaniel Hodges described the chemists and quacks dispensing their medicines that were more fatal than the plague and added to the numbers of the dead. Hodges also recognized that taking excessive blood from those with plague would be life-threatening. In his book he published in 1670, he states he shall dissent, in other words, to go against, the opinion both of ancients and moderns, and is clear in his view that blood could not be drawn from the infected by phlebotomy without loss of strength, if not of life. Hodges' words reflect a quiet departure from ancient methodology and a transition into the familiar modern observational medicine we know today. Now, to understand why bloodletting was so widely practiced, we need to step into the medical mindset of the time. Medicine was still based around the theory of balance, specifically the balance of four bodily humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Although the theory has origins in ancient Egypt or even Mesopotamia, Hippocrates is credited with applying this idea to medicine. But it was Galen who continued this work and suggested imbalances between these fluids resulted in ill health. The theory was then established. Harmony between the humours meant good health. Imbalance meant illness. Blood, considered the dominant humour in the human body, was often blamed when symptoms like fever, swelling, and inflammation appeared.
Overall, the solution seemed logical, at least in the framework that James just explained. If there was too much blood, it had to be released. A vein would be opened and the body would quite literally be drained. This was in the hope that equilibrium would restore. This sounds extreme, but at the time it wasn't seen as extreme. It was seen as necessary, a restoration of order within the body.
From today's perspective, it sounds less like medicine and more like guesswork dressed in uncertainty. Yet, what's striking is not just the method, but the confidence behind it. That confidence came largely from Galen, a Greek physician from the 2nd century, whose writings of the 4 humours shaped medical thinking for over a millennium. Galen believed the human body was controlled by 4 fluids, called humours. According to his theory, a person stayed healthy only when these 4 humours were balanced. The 4 humours were blood, linked to warmth, energy, and vitality; phlegm, linked to coldness, calmness, and sluggishness; yellow bile, linked to heat, anger, and aggression; black bile, linked to sadness, heaviness, and melancholy. If one humor became too strong or too weak, illness was believed to occur. For example, fever could be blamed on too much blood. Depression might be linked to excess black bile. Lethargy could be connected to too much phlegm. This theory shaped medicine in Europe for more than 1,000 years and became the foundation for treatments like bloodletting. And his theory wasn't debated. It was followed. Even in Bath, where elite patients came into the city for treatment for highly regarded physicians, the same framework applied, whether you were bathing in mineral waters or being bled. The goal was identical: restoring balance in the body. Entire generations trusted this approach completely, because within that system, it made perfect sense.
By the Middle Ages, bloodletting had woven itself into everyday life all across England. It was practiced everywhere, from small villages to cities, monasteries, even royal courts. It wasn't reserved for the critically ill. It became routine, and people would submit themselves to the blade in the hope of maintaining health or restoring it.
In some cases, individuals underwent the procedure regularly as a preventative measure, believing it would maintain internal balance and ward off illness.
There's something deeply unsettling about this norm. The idea that someone already weakened by disease would be further drained of strength, and that this was seen as helpful, is difficult to understand. But it wasn't random. Physicians followed detailed guides. Bloodletting was often timed according to astrological charts. Specific veins were chosen depending on the illness, and diagrams showed exactly where to cut. In spa towns like Bath, patients followed strict regimens: waking early, drinking measured amounts of mineral water, walking prescribed routes, and, if symptoms continue, undergoing additional treatments like bleeding. It transforms healing into something structured, almost ritualistic, but also dangerously rigid.
I wonder what my star sign would say, where it would cut. I'm Pisces. I think it would just be just probably straight in the eye or something. Do you know what I mean? Like it's gonna blind me or something. It's gonna. What star sign are you, honey?
Leo, the best one.
Leo. No,
Yeah.
you're definitely getting the scarificator where it just like punches you with blades. Yeah, definitely.
Sick. It's very
Straight
biblical.
in. Karen, what are you?
I'm a Pisces, so I probably bled on the other eye. Because I'm
We're-
a woman, probably they
we're-
would bleed on my two eyes.
Oh, you'd be bled whilst on the stake, mate. You would. Now, the involvement of barbers in medical procedures wasn't accidental. In 1163, the church restricted the clergy from performing surgeries as they had been doing all along, believing that cutting into the body conflicted with religious life. This created a gap. Someone still needed to perform these procedures, and barbers, already skilled with blades and tools, naturally stepped in to fill that role.
And so emerged the barber surgeon. This was a figure who moved seamlessly between grooming and surgery. Therefore, imagine going somewhere, say the barbers today, and in the same place you're having your hair cut, someone next to you is having their bloodlet, or a tooth extraction, or even an amputation. It was the blending of everyday life and medical intervention that seems almost surreal today. While researching this, I have a story, guys. Can I share it?
Of
Please
course.
It's a crazy one.
go for it.
Well, I began to look at any local barber surgeons to see if there were any interesting stories. Didn't think much of it. And then I found a story of, it's not in Bath, but it's in Somerset, of a John Barber of Bruton. Is that how you pronounce it? Bruton? Yeah,
Yeah,
of
correct.
Bruton. Thanks, James. John Barber of Bruton. So he was a barber surgeon. That's what it says. This is a document that has all the barber surgeons of Somerset in this period. In 1540, he was paid 20 shillings to cure the wounds of John Lambert of Kilmington because John Lambert was attacked by a servant of one of the gentry. So someone he knew of, their servant attacked him. And John Barber, the barber surgeon, said that he overheard the gent saying that he wished his servant had cut off Lambert's head. That is crazy in itself.
That's pretty
Nice
brutal.
little local story. That makes it more real, I think, when it adds drama and character. When you add people's stories to history, I think it becomes more real. But upon further research, the man's name was William Hargill of Kilmington. This is the gent that his servant attacked the guy. I hope you're keeping up with this story.
Of
Anyways,
course.
I Googled his name and he subsequently, 16 years later, was murdered by four servants and a different nobleman. So I think there was a lot of drama in this area. I won't get any more into the story, but that was just a little sprinkle of local gossip for you from the 1540s.
That's basically an
Thanks,
episode of
guys. We
Broadchurch.
can move on to the next bit now. I just
That's
wanted to share
basically
that.
an episode of Broadchurch, isn't
Essentially, yes.
it?
Yeah, and the red and white barber pole we still see today carries that history. The red symbolizing blood, the white bandages, and the pole itself representing the stick patients would grip during the procedure to make veins more prominent. And if you picture Georgian Bath, crowded streets, visitors arriving for cures, physicians prescribing treatments, it's not hard to imagine barber surgeons working just alongside that world. Inside those shops, procedures were like venesection, cutting directly into a vein, were performed with simple tools: a lancet, a bowl, and cloth bandages. No anesthesia, no antiseptic understanding. What we now separate into medicine, hygiene, and daily life existed in the same room.
When we ask about how much blood was removed, the answer is actually quite unsettling. It wasn't a small amount or a controlled sample. Sometimes it was an entire bowl. The severity of the illness dictated the volume, at least in theory. More sickness meant more blood needed to be released.
There were guidelines, but they weren't based on evidence. For instance, in the treatise that I mentioned earlier, it specified how the arrangement of the planets and stars can influence when and where on the body to let the blood, which tells us astrology was a powerful belief system that permeated people's daily lives. In extreme cases, patients could lose up to 2 liters of blood in a single session. If symptoms persisted afterwards, the procedure might be repeated, even within the same day.
And it's interesting that
sorry.
astrology is still used by many people nowadays. They look into your astrological charts and they say, this is going to be a good day to go into surgery, or it's better not to go, that day, and watch out for the full moon and things like that. So,
A new love awaits you.
yes,
Like
yes.
fortune, new opportunities. Yeah, especially on like daytime TV as well. There used to be a lot of astrology on daytime TV, and it's interesting. We still kind of
Well,
it still rings true with people sometimes. Doesn't it?
yes, and the monarchies, they always had an astrologer within their
Very true.
group of people and telling them what to do. And I do believe in astrology in many ways, but not in bloodletting actually. But then there we go.
There's a
Here we
I
line.
hope
are.
not. Imagine.
We can't cross that line. That's
Yeah.
stupid. But I think it is worthy to mention that some people do refer to it still when it comes to medicine. It is still maybe a niche, but a very small percentage of people do still prescribe to that kind of guidance. So um, y-
And actually, the hair, you know, we are told, certain times of the month, depending on how the moon is, it's what stage of the moon is going on, that is the best day to get a haircut or not. So
I did not know that.
yes,
What?
it is. It is.
Dictate haircuts. It's quite
Yep.
wow.
What emerges is a dangerous cycle. The lack of improvement was seen as failure, but as proof that more needed to be done. Medical texts from the period describes cases where patients were bled repeatedly over days. The logic was simple. If symptoms remain, excess blood must still be present. In places like Bath, where patients often stay for extended period of times, these interventions could accumulate. Waters, diet, purges, and bleeding layered together. But physiologically, we now know that losing large volumes of blood reduces oxygen, weakens the immune system, and can push the body towards collapse. At the time, deterioration was not questioned, it was reinterpreted.
Now, for my favourite subject, leeches, because they became a widely used alternative to cutting open veins and had been used for centuries, particularly popular from the medieval period into the 19th century. They were seen as a more controlled and less invasive method of blood removal because obviously it doesn't involve blades and knives and stuff. So that was good.
No,
That was good, right?
it involves leeches. Wow, I can't believe that.
We may be here for a while, as this is James's favourite topic of all time. More about leeches. How did they work? So, they were placed directly onto the skin and they would attach themselves and feed and feed and feed until they were full. But rarely one was used. Dozens could be applied at once, each drawing blood in a slow, steady rhythm.
At that scale, it stops feeling like treatment and starts resembling an industry, which in fact it was. By the early 19th century, France alone was using around 40 million leeches per year. Britain imported them in huge numbers, particularly from Eastern Europe. Leeches, Hirudo medicinalis, were valued because they release anticoagulants while feeding, allowing blood to flow continuously. A single leech could consume several times its body weight in blood. In medical settings, including those connected to spa culture, dozens could be applied at once. So what seems primitive, it was part of a highly organized medical supply system.
Now, a treatise on phlebotomy was published in 1658, and it describes how to let blood, or as it was known, breathe a vein, literally to let it out. and how to apply leeches safely. Much of this information has remained unchanged for centuries. Now, leeches largely fell out of use during the early 20th century. An interesting story about leech usage comes from the IUH website, actually. They published an article about a nurse called Edith Kenny, and she was one of the first nurses to join the NHS back in 1948, and she worked in the IUH in Bath. Now, part of her training involved how to apply leeches. But interestingly, the sister that was teaching them and training them told them that leeches were actually obsolete. Now, saying all this, leeches have made a recent comeback. We are still using the same type of leech mentioned all those years ago, the horse leech, the one with the yellow streaks on its back. Even how we apply and remove them is still very much the same. The only difference between us and our 17th century counterparts is why we use them. Back then, it was ubiquitous to aid good health, even if most of the time it actually wasn't. Today, they're used primarily in plastic surgery to aid the prevention of blood clots and to help heal the wound. As it feeds, the leech secretes, as Karen mentioned, hirudin. This is a powerful natural blood thinner and a local anesthetic. This allows the bite to bleed freely for hours after the leech is removed, and by doing so, relieves the pressure.
Now, this is where the story darkens. I say darkens, it does, but you could probably guess what's going to happen. Because of this treatment, people would die. It was the treatment itself that became the cause of death, not the illness, but the attempt to cure it.
There are documented cases where excessive blood loss led to shock, infection, or fatal weakness. One of the most well-known examples is the death of George Washington in 1799. In less than 24 hours, doctors removed approximately 2.5 liters of his blood while attempting to treat a throat infection. 2.5, how many is that in pints? That is oh my god, that is 4.4 pints. Now, isn't it like common knowledge that we grown-ups have like about 8 in our bodies? 7 or 8 pints? That's like half. That's mad.
And I guess, they wonder why they died.
Point demonstrated.
It is difficult to ignore the conclusion that the intervention may have accelerated his death. George Washington's case was one of the most cited. Modern medicine would recognize this as catastrophic blood loss, likely leading to hypovolemic shock, where the body simply cannot maintain blood pressure or oxygen. And what makes this even more striking is that this wasn't considered excessive at the time. It was seen as careful professional intervention. In fact, these same principles were used across Britain and Europe, including in spa towns like Bath. The best intentions guided by the wrong framework.
Indeed, medicine is not shaped by results alone. It is shaped by belief, tradition, and authority. Doctors trusted what they had been taught, and like they are today, and patients trusted their doctors like they are told to today. In many cases, maybe people don't. Do you trust your doctor?
Honestly,
Oh dear.
no. Actually, I've been having some medical issues recently. They've sent me to 3 different hospitals. I've got all kinds of tests and exams and everything. So far, they cannot give me a diagnosis. So, I don't know, trust is the right word for me with.
It's difficult, isn't it?
Yes.
We're all taught to trust doctors just as they were back then, and it is difficult to trust when you're being bounced from doctor to doctor to doctor, and no one really knows what's going on. And I think a lot of people today are going through that. A lot of people. I mean, even getting an appointment is difficult enough.
It's an interesting point to make. I think then there definitely was more trust in doctors. I think now people have to advocate for themselves so much, especially different minority groups, that there's become now a kind of overall, I don't know if it's distrust, but I guess, well, lack of faith or apprehension to booking an appointment because you think, oh, won't be worth it. I'll go and they'll tell me nothing's wrong with me, and I'll go back and carry on with the same symptoms. Whereas then it seemed like, well, I mean, it seemed like they would do anything. And speaking of, back then when we're talking about the bloodletting, when you would go to the doctor, if you died or if you were to be ill, this wasn't blamed on the treatment, this wasn't blamed on the doctor, this was blamed on the illness. It was, oh, you didn't react well to the treatment. Therefore, kind of the system reinforced itself and was protected by a sort of structure of belief that people had when it came to bloodletting. So bloodletting was never blamed for someone dying. It was always the illness that was blamed.
I guess it was, not.
I feel like that was a really long way of putting it, but
I know what you're trying. So if someone was bled and they died, it was not because they took so much blood. It was because their body wasn't actually responding to the treatment,
Yes.
and therefore it was the body and the illness's fault.
correct.
Okay, I get you. It's so pivotal, isn't it? Because I know there's a lot of stories of people doing this in history, and they recover and they say, oh, it must have been the bloodletting, it must have been that treatment I had, when in actual fact they probably would have recovered just as good without it. So it, as you said, it reinforces it. It's a vicious circle.
They were mostly operating with the limits of what they knew. Medical training relied heavily on classical texts. Observation existed, but it wasn't systemized. Outcomes weren't tracked in a way that challenged the theory. Even in places like Bath, where knowledge circulated among physicians and elite patients, these assumptions remain largely unquestioned.
In the 19th century, something shifted. Physicians began recording outcomes, tracking which patients lived and which did not. And for the first time, data entered the conversation.
What this data revealed to people was uncomfortable. Patients who were not subjected to bloodletting often survived at the same rate or even better than those who were.
A turning point began when Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, set off a fury when he began bleeding people dry during the 1793 yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia. Even at the time, Rush was considered a bloodletting fanatic. He also firmly believed that health and disease were different in America than in Europe, and it required a slightly more unique approach. He was of the ideology also that God would provide a cure for every malady if the practitioner patiently sought it out or was chosen to receive it. Now, to give everyone a little insight into what Benjamin Rush was like as a person, there's a quote from Dr. Robert North's biography where, quote, he is unshakable in his convictions as well as self-righteous, caustic, satirical, humorless, and polemical. Make of that what you will. It seems that he was very steadfast, very serious, and perhaps had a very dry sense of humour. Now, we've heard how much blood could be typically taken. Even on the higher end of the scale, it was up to about 40% of the patient's blood. But to put this into perspective, Rush was recommending that up to 80% of the blood should be removed. And during the yellow fever outbreak, North further recounts that so much blood was spilled in the front yard that the site came malodorous and buzzed with flies. Rush's approach would be known as depletion theory, literally depleting a patient of most of their blood. Rush's belief in this absurd theory only strengthened when he himself was struck down with the fever. He was bled of 20 ounces and took 2 doses of calomel and recovered. He saw this as some kind of divine intervention and continued with a renewed conviction, believing God had personally chose him to heal those infected with the yellow fever. However, bloodletting was garnering more and more opposition, especially in light of what he was doing. There is no evidence to suggest bloodletting prevents or cures yellow fever. Rush was convinced he was helping these people, and like many others, used the knowledge available to him at the time. What's more interesting is during the research of this, I found out that he apparently kept a notebook of extremely disciplined observations, wrote everything down that he saw and witnessed, but suddenly stopped during this epidemic when he supposedly began this frenzied bloodletting. During the 100-day epidemic, there were at least 4,044 deaths in Philadelphia, and that is based on grave accounts. In 1966, Chris Holmes made an effort to identify as many of Rush's patients as possible and to track down outcomes of his management. He estimated that 46% of Rush's patients died. There's no doubt that his obsessive belief in this depletion theory worsened his patients and was sometimes even fatal.
That realization marked the beginning of a quiet revolution. In the early 19th century, French physician Pierre-Charles Alexander Louis began comparing patients' outcomes systematically. His studies on pneumonia showed that patients who were not bled survived at similar or better rates than those who were. This was one of the first uses of statistical analysis in medicine. And as this thinking spread across Europe, including Britain, it slowly began to influence medical practice, even in established centers like Bath. For the first time, belief was being tested against evidence.
By the mid-1800s, bloodletting began to fade. This wasn't dramatic, it wasn't all at once, it was gradual, almost silent. New ideas began to take hold. Also, it's quite important to know, James will be very sad about it, but leeches began to drop off too. Leeches were used less because the monetary value increased as they were expensive. It was very hard work to collect them and you could only yield a certain amount at a time, and the demand was crazy. It was a craze. And also the medical value decreased with this new data that Karen's talking about. Therefore, they outweighed each other. Leeches weren't used as much. If you think about how they would collect leeches, there's stories of, it was mostly women that did the work, and they would go into bogs or swamps, marshes, I don't really know the difference. They go into these bogs and the leeches would attach and feed on their legs, and then they would take them from their legs. But they could also use things like meat on a stick and things like that. But this was seasonal, you couldn't do it in winter because the leeches weren't about as much. Therefore, they weren't getting that many leeches. Basically, there was no
Sorry,
point. James.
No point.
Yeah, they were mostly harvested during spring. So
yeah.
Bloodletting was becoming sort of kind of debunked, and therefore the leeches went with them. I get it.
Bye, leeches.
That's okay, because germ theory, hygiene, and scientific experimentation replaced that old framework. Medicine shifted to understanding the body in a measurable, observable way.
And yet, the practice didn't disappear. Today, therapeutic phlebotomy still exists, but in a completely different context. It's usually for conditions like hemochromatosis, where excess iron builds up, or polycythemia vera, where blood becomes too thick. The difference is precision, exact volumes, controlled environments, sterile equipment, and clear diagnostic reasoning. And when visitors walk through places like Bath Medical Museum, seeing instruments used for bloodletting, they're not just seeing outdated tools, they are seeing the evolution of medical understanding.
I think that's really important, Karen, what you said about not just being outdated tools, because the story that we're telling in this episode is not about cruelty, it's not about ignorance, it's about humanity really doing its best with what it believed to be true at the time. Bloodletting represented hope, trust, and a desire to heal, even if the method was flawed.
It also reminds us that science always remains curious, and that certainty, no matter what it is, can be dangerous when it goes unquestioned.
And perhaps, most importantly, it reminds us to stay curious, to question, to learn, and to remain open to change. Because when you stand in a place like Bath, where people once came in search of healing, you begin to see how belief, hope, and medicine have always been intertwined. And history shows us something clearly. Certainty is not the same as truth, and medicine is always evolving.
Because medicine is not just about knowledge, it's about humility. If you enjoyed this episode as much as we did and you'd like to learn more, you're very welcome to come along and hopefully see some of us and we can impart our wonderful knowledge on you. I'm joking, it's a very collaborative learning environment we have at the museum.
I appreciate that.
Yes. We have our exhibition, Bloodletting. It's called Blood, Sweat and Tears, and it will be from the 20th of June until the 27th of June at Bath Medical Museum. We're based near to Bath Thermae Spa, however it is not in Bath Thermae Spa, so please do not go in there asking for bloodletting. And we're open from 12 until 4 every day for the period of that exhibition. There'll be objects to see, there'll be things to read, to touch, to do, maybe smell. You have to come along and find out. And also, on one of the days, we have a very exciting mini exhibit. James, do you want to speak about what you're planning on doing?
A live exhibition,
Oh,
actually.
yes.
It's going to be a live, a live demonstration. So I thought, what better way to teach people about history than to actually perform some? So for this exhibition, on one of the days, I'm not sure when, I'll be advertising it beforehand, closer to the time though. I'm going to acquire some leeches, some live leeches, medicinal, might I add. They're medicinal leeches from a farm in Wales, and I'm going to be displaying them at the exhibition, and on one of the days I will be having a leech on me to have it suck my blood. It will be from what I've researched, a leech takes about up to an hour to fully feed, and then it kind of drops off naturally. It will be happening over a period of about an hour. But I will be there. I will have a leech. If I'm feeling really adventurous, I'll have a couple, who knows. And you can come in and see what it's like, and we'll be able to tell you all about the leeches and how safe they are and what they're used for, like we have been describing in this episode. So watch out for that.
Exciting.
It's going to be great.
You've been listening to Bath Medical Museum, where history isn't always comfortable, but is always human.
Like us. Woo!
Yay!
Well done, guys.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Amazing. Look forward to seeing you all. Come to the exhibition, say hi, blah, blah, blah. Woo!
Woo.